Hello, welcome. My name is Cassandra Blanco. I am Roman Catholic, and I welcome you to my podcast. Today's guests are Deacon Ashley Lessard. Did I get that right? Lessard? Okay.
That's right.
Okay. And Deacon Luke Oestman. So I'm just going to read a short biography on each one, and then we're going to get into both of their journeys to the Catholic Permanent Diaconate. So Deacon Luke Oestman is Director of Priest Accompaniment for FOCUS, which is the Fellowship of Catholic University Students, and is a permanent deacon for the Archdiocese of Denver. He holds a Bachelor's in Biology from Franciscan University of Steubenville and a Masters of Theology from the Augustine Institute. He currently works as a missionary and a farmer living in Colorado with his wife Angela and their 10 kids. Deacon Ashley is a homeschool father of 5 children, as well as a Catholic deacon. As a graduate of Simon Fraser University, he holds a Bachelors of Science in Computing Science. Prior to moving to Colorado, Ashley spent 12 years working for Microsoft. Ashley, his wife Megan, and their 5 children live in Littleton, Colorado. So welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to jump in. I want to just hear both of it's your journey from becoming or encountering Christ or knowing Christ, and that journey from that until you became a Catholic deacon, and then a little bit about that. But first, let's start just with childhood. Like, where were you born? Where were you raised? And we are going to start with Deacon Luke.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Cassandra. So born on the farm out in the northeastern plains of Colorado, great, loving home. I'm the youngest of 3 kids. My dad was Protestant and conservative, and my mom was Catholic and a little bit more liberal. And so we never talked about anything in the home, right? Religion, politics, those were off topic. You just talked about the weather, the sports, and what work we had to do that day, right? So rather idyllic. I mean, I can remember my mom saying, "Hey, Luke, go with your brother." I had an older brother, Mark. Go for a walk in the pasture. Take your BB guns and just go get out of the house. And so we just had a blast as kids, right? There wasn't a sport that we didn't love to play together. There wasn't a family member who didn't want to hang out with us. I had 3 sets of grandparents on both my mom and dad's side. And then I had a set of great grandparents who I was closest to. Every day after school, I'd go to their house. So I was just aware of being deeply loved by all these families surrounding me. Had lots of responsibility on the farm, driving tractors at the age of 10, just had a lot of responsibility, and a stable upbringing. The faith was definitely kind of something that was given to me, the Irish side of Catholicism, 3-4 generations back, right? This is what we do. And it wasn't until I got the invitation to go to World Youth Day in 2000, pilgrimage, first time ever leaving the state, really, first time flying, first time doing a whole bunch of things. And here I was in the eternal city of Rome with, a million other pilgrims and encountering the depths of Catholicism. And so that's really my junior year of high school is kind of where the Lord broke in. I finally asked God, what do you want for me in my life? Not what do I want, but what do you want? And something happened. I was praying at the foot of St. Francis's grave there in Assisi, and I just asked the Lord. And it was really a parish priest who told me, "Luke, while you're over there, ask God what he wants for you in your life." And so I prayed that prayer at the grave of St. Francis, and something happened. Tears started coming down my face. It was the first time that crack in my heart ever opened to a personal relationship with the Lord. And I won't say my life has changed permanently, from that moment forward, but that was the initial conversion moment where, hey, there's something here. God is bigger than me, and I want to explore this. So, yeah, that's kind of my childhood in a nutshell before I went off to college, and it really became, a way of life my freshman, sophomore year. But I can get more into that later.
Yeah. Absolutely. Beautiful. Okay, Deacon Ashley, do you want to introduce yourself and share about your beginning, where you were born, and a little bit about the beginning of your faith as well?
Sure. So I'm Canadian. I was born in Edmonton, Alberta. So way up north, you go past, start in Colorado, go into I guess Wyoming and then Montana, and then like keep going. Kind of closer to the Northwest Territories than to the U.S. border. So quite a ways up there, 2.5 hours northeast of Edmonton, Alberta. So born up there. Three older sisters, all doted on me. I'm the youngest as well. They all say that I'm the favorite. I don't agree with them, but it's hard to argue with three older sisters. So grew up on a farm. Actually, split my childhood kind of first half of my life or childhood. Grew up on a farm, which was like a wonderful experience. My dad's dad had a bunch of land. They had kind of pioneered in Alberta. His dad, my grandfather, had moved out from Quebec when he was 2 years old, and so they kind of pioneered in a French Catholic community. And but I remember my grandpa had a bunch of land. Then my uncle was next to him, and he had a bunch of land. And then we were next to him, and he had a bunch of land. And then my other uncle was next to us, and he had a bunch of land. And I had 6 cousins to the right of me and 3 to the left and a bunch in the town. And so we would just kind of roam back and forth across all of this territory like freely. And it was a beautiful childhood. A beautiful childhood in that respect. Just so much opportunity to be out and gone for the whole day and just exploring and playing with relatives and cousins. So love that. When I was just after elementary school, we moved to the interior of British Columbia, which is all forest and beautiful in a whole different way. I think growing up, I went to Catholic school from like K to 6. After that, when we moved to British Columbia, we really didn't. I went to a public school, and I think our faith life, my faith life as a child growing up was it was like hit and miss. It was like Easter and Christmas for sure. It was like occasional Sundays. It was very much cultural French Catholic. And growing up around, a bunch of French Canadian farmers, they have a very particular view of life. And so there's always a lot of color in it. And so then, kind of left the faith when I started going to public school, and but always searching and just always looking for something deeper, something of purpose and meaning. And so 16, 17-year-old all through high school looking for deeper purpose and meaning, and then finally found my way to what I thought was the meaning of life, which was philosophy, and somehow got redirected back to my faith, rediscovered that everything I'd always been looking for was always there. I just was never really introduced to it. And so found that at the same time, my wife and I were dating. And so I came back to the church at that time. She came back with me eventually. And then you kind of know the rest from my brief bio. We can get into more of it, but I have 5 beautiful children, and we live in Colorado now.
Awesome. Good. All right. So Deacon Luke, excuse me. Luke and I actually know each other for many years. So this is going to be a little bit of transition to call him Deacon Luke. But Deacon Luke, can you elaborate more about what your encounter with Christ like? You kind of skimmed over it, but what was that moment like? What led up to it? What happened during that time? And how did your life change afterwards?
Yeah, it's really kind of cool that you ask. It has so many, it's almost like a seed that the Lord planted in that moment over in Assisi. The months leading up to it, my parish priest had said, Luke, I have multiple parishes and I can't get to church in time to set up for Mass. Would you be my sacristan? And so kind of a father figure stepped into my life and like gave me responsibility. And every time we would meet after I'd prepared, for Mass and made sure all the lectors were there and all the extraordinary ministers were there, we would just have 5 or 10 minutes to talk before Mass. And he would always share with me kind of the fruit of his spiritual life or an experience he had. And he was so joyful. And so there was something that was starting to kind of well up in me that, hey, I want more out of life than just, popularity, sports, all these things. And when I went over there to Assisi, I encountered some Franciscan friars for the first time in my life. I never met religious being out on the farm. They didn't come out there. And I remember just being so struck by their witness. These guys give up money, any possessions, they give up sex and a potential for relationship, and they take total obedience to their superior. It was like the opposite of all the things I was striving after, right? Like the complete opposite of the world. And I was just so enamored with that reality. And my luggage had actually gotten lost. And so I was up in Assisi, encountering these guys who were poor, and I didn't have a thing with me in a foreign country. And it was really hot and sweaty. And like I was living out of the clothes on my back. And it was just like the Lord was preparing me for this moment of encounter, where I knelt down after Mass. So Jesus was within me.
Mm-hmm.
And I knelt down and I prayed beside this saint who I didn't know. And I really just prayed, God, what do you want from me? And in that moment, literally, I felt the presence of God. I knew God was palpably real, like you're down in this, crypt church and it's dark and candlelight. And the gift of tears came upon me. And I just said, God, I want what you want. And in a certain sense, I kind of prayed for a double outpouring of the Spirit, kind of like St. Francis had done, kind of like Ezekiel, Elijah, Elisha, all these guys. But I didn't know it at the time. And then from there, we went back down to Rome for World Youth Day with John Paul II, now St. John Paul II. And I remember hearing his words of like, do not be afraid, youth especially, don't be afraid to answer the call that God gives you. And I thought that call was to become a Franciscan friar for a lot of years. I went and I pursued that for 5 or 6 years. But then ultimately I went back to Rome and Assisi, the senior year of my college time, and asked the Lord, am I called to this? And he said, no, the Franciscans are put there as a sign of what you're made for, which is heaven and living completely in a relationship with me, but that's not your calling. Mm-hmm. And so in a beautiful way, I was released from that thought that I have to become a Franciscan, because that's where my, conversion came from. And then really that deep desire in my heart to get married came up from that. And in between those two moments, I'd say my faith really became a deep perpetual conversion. Like in my freshman year of college, I had a buddy reach out to me who we were studying physics, the other PH one, physics together. And it was a really hard class. So we spent a ton of time together building up a lot of trust. But he was a navigator's student leader. And so he had been trained how to evangelize and how to make disciples. And that's what he did. He started asking me questions. Luke, what does it mean to be a Christian? And when I couldn't answer him, I didn't have a good explanation of why I was a Christian. It pricked in me like, hey, I'm living this double life. I'm a hypocrite. I can't live one way 6 days of the week and then another way on Sunday. And we started journeying together, trying to get out of addictions to lust and these attachments to the world that I had. And he was my accountability. And we journeyed together over a year. And he started helping me read scriptures. And I started to hear the Lord's voice on a daily basis as I was reading through the Gospels. And finally, in Acts chapter 16, I read that Paul cut his hair because he had a vow. And that hooked me. I was like, what? Why did Paul cut his hair? Mm-hmm. Actually, it's not Acts 16, it's Acts 18, Acts 18:18. And I looked it all up. Hey, Paul took a Nazarite vow. He wanted to be like Samson in the Old Testament. Started reading all about that. And ultimately, I took a Nazarite vow to the Lord. I said, Lord, I'm not going to drink. I'm not going to date. And every time I commit a mortal sin, I'm going to run back to confession, like as soon as possible, to the same priest. So I'm not going to go to multiple priests. I'm going to go back to the same guy. And I cut my hair. I shaved my head. And so for that whole year, I grew out my hair. And by the end of that year, I had a deep personal relationship with Jesus, and I trusted him to forgive my sins. And I was searching to become a disciple, not my own person anymore. And so, fast forward, the seeds were planted in Assisi in 2000. And in 2005, I transferred schools. I was going to a Catholic college, learning everything, the beauty of the Catholic faith, and my heart was just on fire to serve the Lord. So yeah, that's in a nutshell. That kind
Beautiful.
of 5-6 years of deep transformation through
Right, which is like,
continuing encounters.
like you
Yeah.
said, it's like the seed, and then from that, everything else has grown since then. So,
Mhm.
yeah, we'll go
Mhm.
into more. Awesome. Thank you. All right, Deacon Ashley, do you want to share about so honing in on your own, like you said, you and your wife met, and then you guys both returned to the church or started going back. Do you want to share more about that specific journey and hone into that time in your life?
Sure. First, I changed my mind. I want to go before Luke because I don't know who can follow that. So
Okay.
following Luke is a very tough gig. So yeah. So I think because I'd always been searching from like 16, from 14, 15, 16. I felt like an old soul. Always been searching for, and I was looking in different places. Finally found philosophy. And I mean, I've told this story. Luke's probably heard this story before, where I'm taking this philosophy 101 class. I'm like, yes, this is it. I finally found it. And so I'm like, I just have this tendency to like, if when I discover something, I find something, I want to go kind of all in. I want to go, just very aggressive with that.
Mhm.
And so I went to the library and I was like grabbing all the philosophy books I could. And I was walking down the aisle that has like all the philosophy books. And I'd reached the end and I was going to turn the corner and look on the shelf behind me. And I remember turning to the shelf behind me, except it wasn't philosophy anymore. Turns out and I never went back and looked at this actually to see if it's a thing, but theology, like philosophy stopped and theology started. And I saw a book on there it just the title just like struck me, and it's called The Seven-Story Mountain. It's a book. It's the autobiography of Thomas Merton actually, and it tells his story of growing up. He grew up atheist, I think. I think if I recall it correctly. But he came to a deep love of the church, and I just I as I read his story, I realized it was kind of like my story. I had become lost, but what I was looking for was always there. I just never, again, like I said before, I'd never been introduced to it. And so I read that, and then I came back to the faith pretty hot.
Mhm.
I remember actually, and to be honest, like I had no idea what I was doing. So I remember I was driving to work one day, and I'm a little. Sometimes I can be like Luke, so sometimes I can have a few tears, and so I was driving to work one day, and I just started crying because I thought, oh man, why did I miss this all along? And there's this Catholic church on the way to my work. I'd never noticed before. I pull into this Catholic church. I go sit in the back, and I'm just sitting there, and it doesn't even dawn on me that this place is even open in the middle of the day. And I'm sitting there, and this priest comes back to me. And he says, "Hey, what's going on?" And I was like, "You know what? I want to do it all over again. I want to do it right this time." And so I actually asked him, like, can I just get baptized again? Can we just do this over? And so I learned there that you can't do that. Um, he's like, and he was very patient with me. He's like, no, that's not how it works. Here, go to confession. Let's talk more. Um, but I just came back really, really hot. I started reading a ton of material, started listening to, a bunch of Catholic answers, just trying to like soak up as much of the faith as I could. Because I was just finding a lot of truth and a lot of beauty and a lot of goodness in it that I hadn't known before. So my wife and I had started having a conversation. She actually, probably at risk of sharing too much, but so when I come back too hot, she goes to her, we're just dating, but she goes to her grandmother and says, "Hey, this guy's gonna become a monk. I don't know if I can continue this. It's time, maybe I think I got to break up with him." And I think her grandma just kind of like patient, as grandmas do. They just kind of like listened and patiently like, kind of walked with her. But then, we got to talking. So I was like, "Hey, I got to stop going to bars. I got to stop doing this." I'm like, I am trying to live a new life here. But praise God, um, she she gave me enough. She was patient enough with me just to kind of like slowly walk with me on that. then she started coming back to her faith because she was raised Catholic. She was an Irish Catholic. But again, kind of the same thing, had left at college and was starting, and then when I came back, we kind of rediscovered the faith together. That led us to start going back to church. We met actually a group of people at our local parish that were just kind of really devout, really intentional about their faith life. They started to kind of mentor us in what it meant to live a life that was really after Christ. And so we started to learn a lot more through them, started to experience a lot more through them. And then we just kind of grew slowly in that. At some point I decided, and I'm not sure if we'll talk about this later, but at some point I decided, I wonder if I feel like I might be called to the diaconate. I actually brought the paperwork home to the application home. This is when we're living in Seattle. Brought the paperwork home, the application to her, and I remember I showed it to her. She was raking leaves in the yard, and I showed it to her, and she looked at me straight in the eye and said no. and I was like, oh wow, like this is like the first time she's ever said no to me, I think, in my life. She's a very holy woman. But so I was just surprised. I was shocked by that. But the Lord took us on a journey. It turns out that I wasn't supposed to pursue that in Seattle. We actually weren't supposed to stay in Seattle. We ended up moving to Colorado. And 2 years after we moved to Colorado, we were up at a family camp in the mountains, and we were in adoration. And I just knew at that moment that for some reason I felt drawn. It's kind of like Luke in a sense. I felt drawn to go all in. And that's the moment where things change for you. I think there's a moment in everyone's life where they decide, you know what, I'm all in. Let's do this. And at that point, there's joy, there are a bunch of emotions. But I think then, like Luke was saying, your heart opens in a new way, and the Lord now has something to work with. And he begins to mold you and bring you along. And so so that moment in adoration, which again, is so beautiful. I don't know if Luke said this in his story, but most of my faith, most of the most significant moments of my faith life have been in front of the Blessed Sacrament. So either in adoration or at Mass. And so I remember sitting in Mass. So let me finish with this. So I'm sitting in Mass, and so actually the diaconate had fallen off my mind. I thought, Megan was not interested. We moved to Colorado. We were so focused on the move to Colorado and getting the kids settled and getting all that sort of stuff. We didn't know anybody. We had a tent trailer and at that time 4 kids and a tent trailer and 4 kids, and didn't know a person in Colorado. Moved here, so we were focused on getting that all set. After that retreat in the mountains, I'm back down in Mass. I remember it's the beginning of Lent. It's Ash Wednesday, actually, which now I take to be a personal holy day. Sorry, Lord. But it's Ash Wednesday, and I'm kneeling in Mass, and I remember thinking that I could, for some reason, he put on my heart that, the permanent diaconate again. I remember thinking, I don't want to do it. I can't do it. Like, I just looked up and I saw the deacons serving on the altar, and I was like, I do not want to be up there in front of everybody. And he was just like, it was very clear to me. He was just like, oh, is that all? Is that what you're worried about? Because it's not about you. It's about me. So don't worry about that. And I was like, wow, okay. I never thought of that, actually. I guess I was too full of myself. And so I looked down, and the reading for Ash Wednesday at that moment, of the antiphon, whatever it was now is a very acceptable time. And I remember thinking, dang it. Yes. Okay. Here it is. And I started crying again. And sure enough, I put the application in for the permanent diaconate. I asked my wife a second time. She broke down in tears. She was like, yes. So we went from like a crazy no to a very firm yes. And I got accepted. And what's interesting is, when I started formation, you can only start formation 2 years after you move to the state. And it was like almost to the day that I had been here 2 years that I started. And so the timing was just inspired. So that's kind of my journey to everything leading up, I guess, to the application to the permanent diaconate.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to return back to you, Deacon Ashley, after I ask Luke a little bit more his journey to the diaconate,
Yeah.
and ask you, Deacon Ashley, so just about the role. I think maybe not everyone is aware that the spouse plays a very significant role. Your wife plays a very significant role in the journey towards the permanent diaconate. So I do want to return back to you on that as well. Maybe you could just share more about that as well. But Deacon Luke, I want to ask you about your journey to the diaconate. If you want to share more about that journey, speed up from conversion all the way up to your journey to become a Catholic deacon.
Yeah, that's great. As I'm listening to Deacon Ashley, it's so much fun of like, hey, my conversion is very much like the heart, right? Like the Lord's winning my heart over, experiencing these deep, profound moments with him in the Eucharist, in the Mass, and with the saints. And Deacon Ashley's like, intellectually, bowling through all the worldly philosophies till he finds Christ. So I love it. The conversion moments are, I think that's why we're best friends now, right? Like I entered formation. I live a couple hours away from formation, so I drove a long ways every weekend, and I was thinking, I'm not going to get to know any of these guys up there because they're so far removed from my experience out here on the farm. And like the second weekend up there in formation, Ashley and I are taking a walk over lunch, and I'm like, dude, this guy's like gonna be my best friend. What the heck? This is awesome. Awesome. So yeah, and I do apologize for the lights. They just go off if there's no movement. Oh, there they came back
there we
on.
go.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So hopefully that doesn't ruin the quality of this podcast.
Okay. That's okay.
Yeah. So from senior year of college, I really had fallen in love with the church and serving the church. And so I wanted to work for the church with a biology degree and a minor in theology, right? Like I got as much theology as I could once I transferred to Franciscan, but knew I wanted to work for the church. So I went on that pilgrimage back to Rome and Assisi with a priest friend. I didn't know him before that pilgrimage, but afterwards we became really close friends. And he just became a pastor at a church and said, Luke, I'd like you to apply. We have a DRE, Director of Religious Education, position open, and I think you'd be great at it. So I went ahead and applied and got hired. It was amazing. It was a mega church out in Virginia. I don't know, 10,000 parishioners, like more parishioners than my home county had people, right? Like it was massive and multicultural, and English and Spanish and Vietnamese and Filipino. And I mean, it was just like so much fun to step into that and try and learn how to serve the church and serve Christ. And I remember, similar to Deacon Ashley, like thinking, I can't do this, Lord. Like, who am I, 22 years old, to like direct an educational program with 850 kids, 100 volunteers, multiple languages? Like, who am I? And I remember kneeling down in adoration and Jesus just saying, Luke, if you believe that I'm truly present here in the Eucharist, then you can do this. Like, that's the one thing you have to teach if you want to be a director of religious education. Like, if you believe this with all your heart, then you can do it. And I just said, all right, Lord, I believe, help me, help my unbelief. And we, kind of stepped into it together, and wonderful 3 years. My wife and I got married in that time, had our first child. She was working as a nurse overnight in a pediatrics unit. And so I was trying to, work all day and then take care of this newborn at night. And it was a crazy time away from family out in Virginia. And the Lord, through my family, with my wife, we kind of discerned like, hey, we're pregnant with our second child. Maybe we should make a change. Like, this is a lot to have two incomes to try and make ends meet in Northern Virginia, which is a very expensive place to live. And so that's when we discerned, like, let's go back to school. I'll go get my master's degree at the Augustine Institute, and we'll move back to Colorado, which is closer to my family. And at the end of that period, studying under some of the best minds of how to serve the church, right? I was studying evangelization and catechesis, just loving learning with Dr. Shree and Dr. Gray, and just amazing family men who were trying to serve the church. At the end of that time, it was 2008, so nobody wanted to hire people and pay them more money to support like a single income home in the church because of the economic downturn. And I learned about FOCUS's model of like relational ministry, and their growth rate was crazy. It was like 10, 15, 20% growth rate. And they were doing the same thing as the early church. And I just finished learning about the early church, how in the first 300 years of the church's history, we went from 3,000 at Pentecost to like over 300,000 when Christianity became legal under Constantine. And I thought, wow, the church didn't expand in mass conversions. They expanded little by little through personal relationships of people sharing the good news when it was illegal to have big events, right? Like in the church. And so I thought I could commit myself to this type of mission, but I'm kind of worried about fundraising, and I'm kind of worried about being radically available on a college campus. And my wife, again, these holy wives, when I brought it to her and I said, I'm a little worried about this and the money and the availability, she said, well, Luke, what are we afraid of? Like, she's like, I always wanted to be a medical missionary down in third world country. We're afraid of being first world missionaries. Like, and she totally called me out. And so I applied. And so now I've been a missionary for the past 15 years with FOCUS and just love serving the church. And I think my wife saw it before I did, but she's like, she kind of knew like, okay, he loves the church. And when FOCUS said they were going to start sending missionaries out into parishes, I was the first one to raise my hand and say, let's go. I went in on that because I love the church. I love the parish particularly. And so over the past 9 years, I've been serving the church in that capacity as a missionary in a parish again. So it's kind of been fun taking everything I learned with young adults and now applying it into the parish setting. And I guess about year 2 into serving in the parish, that call to become a deacon really flourished again, of just like, Luke, you're made for a deeper service of the church. All the way back from being a sacristan in high school, I just loved serving the church in this capacity. And so I went on a come and see weekend down in one of the other dioceses I was serving in as a missionary, and there was no peace coming out of it. There was actually kind of like a lot of turmoil, and I was like, Lord, I thought you were calling me to this. Like, my wife says I am. I've had the conversation with my bosses, like they're open to it, like, and just no peace. And then I was flying to Colorado for a training with FOCUS and had just learned this new technique for praying for healing. And basically just like praying for healing every day, not just like on a retreat where the Lord kind of identifies some deep need of healing, but just being open to being healed by the Lord every day. And so I gave the Lord total freedom. I said, Lord, and this was on a plane flight. I was doing my holy hour on a plane flight. And I just said, Lord, whatever you want to heal, heal it. And it was kind of cool because I was just sitting there praying with him. And he brought up this memory of being like 10 years old, 11 years old on the farm, spring break, in March or April, it was still cold out, and fixing fence with my dad. Barbed wire fence, we were pounding staples in, gloved hands. I was freezing, shaking cold. And finally he said, Luke, just get in the pickup. You're too cold, like go sit in there and warm up for a little while. But as an 11-year-old, I heard, I don't have what it takes. I'll never be a farmer like my dad, like my older brother. I'm not good enough. And in this way, the priest who had taught us this healing method, he said, now go through that moment with Christ there. See the situation through Christ's eyes. And Christ said, well, Luke, you were with your dad on spring break. Every other boy was sitting at home playing a computer game or whatever, Sega Genesis at that point. You were with your dad. Wouldn't that be great if you had that experience with your children? Because as a missionary, you're out and about a lot. I was pretty integrated with my family, but we didn't have land. We didn't have this experience of coming the farming lifestyle. And then the Lord really healed that memory of like, my dad had a good intention there. It wasn't, I believed a lie. Let's let the Lord reverse that lie to a truth. And this desire to move back home to Colorado just flourished. And so we did. We moved back to Colorado. We moved back to the family farm. I farmed out there for 3 years with my dad, with my brother, and still worked with FOCUS, still kept this foot in both camps, farmer, missionary. And quickly, very similar to Deacon Ashley, when we moved back, that desire for diaconate just flew open. And again, it was too soon to apply. I didn't hear back right away because they were in between directors. And like, I was like, Lord, I'm not going to apply. I can't even be accepted until kind of that 2-year mark. And I was only a year in. And he's like, no, apply. And so I did, and I was accepted. I went on the retreat, and like, I walked into the chapel when that old kind of like frustration started bubbling up of like, well, maybe I'm not going to be obedient enough. Maybe I can't do the things they're asking me to do, drive a couple hours every other week for formation. Like, that's too much. And I walked into the chapel, and in this beautiful little chapel at St. John Vianney Seminary, there was a relic of John Paul II's blood right in front of a stained glass window of St. Francis. And I was like, okay, Lord, you planted that seed. You know exactly what I'm made for. I need to just stop trying to control this process and say yes if this is your calling. And so every one of my natural worries, and my wife was on that retreat, and they were grilling us because we had like 7 or 8 kids at the time, of like, what happens if your wife passes away? And a lot of these big natural fears, they all just dropped away. I was like, you planted that seed back in 2000, you had a plan, and I want to answer and do your will. So it's pretty cool. Yeah, that was kind of when that was my yes of like, okay, I can do this. If you call, Lord, I'll go.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Beautiful. Everyone has their own path, you know? I mean, Deacon Ashley's journey is different. Your journey is different. We're all different. So very beautiful. All right, Deacon Ashley, do you want to share just more about the spouses part in the journey to diaconate? And then another question I have for you is the Catholic Church in Canada versus the Catholic Church in America, and what your experience is in both.
Oh man. Okay. So the spouses. Yeah, I don't even know where to start with that. I think you can hear it come out in sort of my story and in Luke's story, how important spouses are in this whole process. Really as just like a partner in the journey. And I mean, I've gotten a chance to know Luke's wife Angela really well, and so I can say honestly, like, more than a partner, somebody who these are holy women who are like just helping you like navigate all of this stuff. And so as a real partnership in your spiritual life. But so there's kind of 2 parts to it, I guess. The first part is like, practically speaking, the spouses are required to agree. They're required to like give their permission. When we went through formation, at the end of every year, our spouses are required to write a letter saying, I approve my husband continuing on this process. And so there's and then through the whole process of formation, the wives go through their own process of formation as well, and so they're required to go through a slightly different schedule of formation, but their own journey of formation too. But I think sort of more than that is what the Lord has in store for you together. So there's just no separating the two. Like. Sometimes you'll hear it's called a call within a call, but it becomes very clear very early that if this is going to work, if you're going to be able to say yes to the Lord the way you want to, or you need to, or he would like you to, then that yes can only come in the context of a yes with of you and your spouse, you and your wife. And so it's really fascinating actually, because there's a lot of like dialogue that happens through the 4 years between you two. There's a lot of growth. There's a lot of prayer. There's a lot of ups and downs, and you have to learn. And then you get ordained, and the first year is such a year of learning and growth and trying to understand like relationship with your wife. But there's such a goodness and a beauty to it, and it takes on a new depth
Mm-hmm.
because of what you're trying to do together and how you're trying to like serve one another together through it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, I don't know if it's hard to explain.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that there was there's been no person, other than the Lord, of course, but no person on earth who's been more significant or important to my diaconal call and my diaconal ministry than my wife.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Absolutely. I know I have other friends who are deacons, and if I understand it correctly, the formation process, the wives also have to attend the classes, or they have classes that they have to attend as well. Is that correct?
Uh,
I don't know if it's
in
the
our,
same in every diocese.
yeah, I think it varies in dioceses. In
Okay.
our program, they attend sort of their own track.
Okay. Okay. No, yeah. Okay. All right. And then do you want to share just a little bit about the differences since you are Canadian?
No,
No, you
I
don't want to
do.
share?
Getting hot.
If you want to, you don't have to if you don't want to. I just think it would be nice to have an understanding what's happening in the Catholic Church in Canada. But if you want to.
The truth is, I just can't answer that question. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
Since since I moved to the States, I'm kind of I'm kind of clueless about what's going on in Canada. Some of that's intentional, but some of it is just like, entering into life here.
Mm-hmm.
My family, so, I'm no different than a lot of people. Much of my family no longer practices. They fell away from the church. But what's beautiful is like you see them coming back slowly. You see them like sort of their hearts beginning to soften. They're on their own journey. They're searching. They're in their own way.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they don't. They were never they were never introduced to the faith the way and even the way I was later, and so they're still exploring that and still figuring that out.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't have a connection back to the church through them at all, and so the truth is I just don't know a
Yeah, you
lot.
don't know. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no problem. All right. So you guys, I want to talk a little bit more about diaconate, but I also want to just talk about you're both married and you both have children. So I would love to just hear your own, like anything you want to share, like being married, ups and downs, being parents, ups and downs, and any advice maybe to younger people that are just starting off their families, anything you want to share. So I'm going to start with Deacon Luke.
Whoa, that's a really big question. I think Deacon Ashley has better thoughts to share first. Why don't you go first on this one, Deacon Ashley?
I'll go first just because it means I don't have to follow you.
Okay.
Yeah, it is a big question, isn't it? I would say this for people who are just starting out in their marriage, or maybe they have young children.
Mm-hmm.
I think two things. First, invest, as a couple, invest heavily in your spiritual life. Invest in the Lord. So just, learn to pray together, learn to begin to really take your faith seriously and enter into it deeply. I think, your life is changing. You now have a vocation to married life, and you're going to have, praise God, you're going to have children. It's okay to leave behind kind of your previous life and to now like enter into that married life and that parenthood in a much more meaningful way. And there's no better way to do that than to invite the Lord into that in a meaningful, deep way. Give your whole yes to Him in the context of your marriage and your parenthood. The second thing is, I guess maybe for guys, just invest in your wife. So that relationship means so much, and it's gonna mean so much later. And I think there's a great temptation for guys to have children and then to look at them as their project. It's like, oh, I got this new project. Like I'm gonna make my son, like I had my firstborn. I'm gonna make my son super smart, and then I'm gonna make him like super holy. And but they become your project, and like you all of a sudden, if you're not careful, you're throwing yourself into your children in a way that kind of ignores your wife and ignores that relationship. I would say do the opposite. So, invest in your spiritual life, invest in your spiritual life with your wife, but then invest in her and invest in your relationship with her and make that intentional. And so, there's the obvious things, date nights and these kind of things, and all of that is goodness. And those are not trivial, by the way. Those
Mm-hmm.
really do matter. But I think invest in her in a way that she's the most important thing in your life, other than God or next to God, and then your children.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that would be my advice.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Absolutely. All right, Deacon Luke.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love telling parents of like young children, like you're in the first 10 years. Like that's just the grind, like just keep going. The
Yes,
light is there at the end of the tunnel. It's
it,
coming where
it
it's
gets
like,
better.
yeah, it does. It gets better. Everybody always says like, oh, enjoy it now while they're little. It goes so fast. And it's true, on the other side, I've been married 17, 18 years, and my oldest is just about to, graduate in a year or two. And I'm thinking, gosh, can you just be my little girl forever? Like
Mm-hmm.
stop growing. But yeah, it gets so much better. You get those younger years, the kids are like chirping baby birds. They constantly have needs, and you're constantly like, feeding them. And it's exhausting, and you're getting no sleep, and clinically probably could be diagnosed with some sort of sleep disorder. It's so worth it because it gets better.
Mm-hmm.
I love having some deeper conversations about the books they're reading, or about how to pray better, or when they start asking these discernment questions. It's so much fun. But just to see them become who they're meant to be,
Mm-hmm.
as that 10-year-old, 11-year-old who starts to have a desire to pray on their own, it's
Mm-hmm.
just such a joy. Or to see them start investing in their younger siblings, to see them handing on that love. I remember Kimberly Hahn and Scott Hahn sharing that love isn't addition and subtraction.
Mm-hmm.
Love is multiplication. Like when you have more than one child, or two children, or 10 children, like the love multiplies. Like to
Mm-hmm.
see how my 14-year-old son loves my 3-year-old son with more patience than I do. Like I love to see that. I love that they're helping me to share the love of Christ with
Mm-hmm.
their younger siblings.
Oh my
And
goodness, that's a really good point, actually. By the way, too, right? That I always say that your children will make you holy. If you let them, they will make you holy. So
yeah,
not just in like those early years where they're asking for a lot of things, but also like next thing you know, you turn around and they're like doing something that you wish you could do better, but like you're like, well, wait a minute, like how did you do that? Like I've been working on that for years. So yeah, I love that, Luke.
yeah. And you said probably my biggest conversion as a parent was like when I went from the model of I need to control my kids. It's up to me to get my kids to heaven. I heard somebody say this as a teaching, like when they're underneath your roof, it's your job never to allow them to commit a mortal sin. And it's like, oh my goodness, if God treated me that way, I would have left the church a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
God treats me as his beloved child, whom he wants to only receive the good gifts. He's not an authoritarian dictator. He's a loving father who can't
Mm-hmm.
wait to be with me.
Mm-hmm.
And when I realized like it's not my job to get my children to heaven, it's their job to get me to heaven. And I actually, the greatest thing I can give them is patience and gentleness, and like a virtuous life which responds to all their needs
Mm-hmm.
with patience and with like grace, and asking God to be there with me, and to rub off my rough edges, because I have a lot of them, and they push all of my buttons every day, and I need God to help me in that, and they do as well. They need
Mm-hmm.
me to have God's grace in that
And I think that
moment.
that's another great point there. Like just being honest and vulnerable with them. Like
Mm,
there's a point where you begin to like the facade begin. If you let it, the facade begins to like drop away, and you all of a sudden you can, if you're just honest and vulnerable with them, and you admit your mistakes, and you say, hey, like I'm just really struggling with this thing. I'm really trying to work on being more patient. Would you help me? Or like, you know, can you, just be patient with me as I'm trying to like grow in that. But like to be honest and vulnerable with them, I think really matters. It really invites them into the pursuit, of a holy life, or the pursuit of trying to grow closer to the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times I think we can hold them off at a distance a little bit. We cannot share enough with them. But I love the idea of just being honest and vulnerable with them and inviting them into that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Some of my favorite parenting moments are where I need to sit my daughter down and apologize. Hey, I'm
Yes.
sorry. I really came across as unloving, and
Yeah.
I need your forgiveness here. And I'm crying and she's crying, and like there's a genuine like healing that happens there in that moment, where if I hold on to this authoritarian, it's up to me to toe the line on everything. Gosh, my kids are unhappy. I'm unhappy. My wife's unhappy. So yeah, that parenting, there's stages, and there's beautiful return as the children go out and find their vocations, and really raising that child to look at, is God giving me a higher vocation first, before, like, everyone's called to marriage. Of course you're called to marriage, but is God inviting you into a deeper vocation of making a deeper sacrifice in becoming a priest or a religious sister?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so fun to have teenagers who are asking that question, honestly and genuinely, and going on those adventures with them, taking them up into the mountains or taking them on a come and see to a religious order or something. And it's just a whole new level of parenthood that I never expected. It's just a joy, to help them discern their vocations. So
Beautiful. Anything else you want to add, Ashley, about that?
I forget what we were talking about.
Oh,
I don't know where we started in this.
Marriage
last
and
thing.
parenting. Marriage
thing.
and parenting.
Yes, probably the most important thing, right? Is your blessing, right? The Father's blessing. Many people in the church think it's just a priest's job to bless. And that's true if you're only thinking about the church, right? But like in our God-given gift as parents, and especially when we stand before God at the altar, at the baptismal font, and we invite our children to become Christians at their baptism, we trace the sign of the cross on their forehead right before they're baptized, claiming that authority. And so I think I don't want to contradict myself. I said, don't be an authoritarian in the worldly sense of like, you have to do everything for your children, but claim that spiritual authority of being their father, of being their mother. And you actually have a blessing to give them each and every day in both words and actions, in unity with the blessing that comes from the priest and from the church. And I think honestly, as our culture became very clerical, kind of, hey, the priest will do this, the sisters will do this through Catholic schooling, parents kind of lost that understanding of like, no, you have a real blessing to give to your children and to claim that they are God's children, so that the powers of evil don't have a foothold in their life. And so it can be as simple as tracing the sign of the cross on their forehead every night as you put them to bed, just like you did before they got baptized. And it can be as beautiful and unique as a word of blessing particular to each child. Charlie, you're a strong warrior, and you were created to protect, and God loves you just as you are, and there's nothing you can ever do to lose his love. I'm so proud of you. May God bless you in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, as I trace the sign of the cross on his forehead. It can be super simple, or it can be beautiful and unique. So I think, honestly, as parents, that's probably the greatest gift that you can give your children, is that spiritual protection that you're given by being a parent, by the sacrament of matrimony and the sacrament of baptism, both.
Yeah, and then just along those lines, like just to take again that, to be intentional, I guess, about forming them in the faith and forming them in their spiritual lives, that belongs to you as a parent. You are their primary educator. This famous term we love, but that does belong to you, and you can take that and you can grow in it. I think sometimes we have these, I hear this question that says, how do I keep my kids in the faith? How do I make sure that when they grow up, they don't leave the faith? And of course, there's nothing we can do to guarantee that. But my response has changed over the years. I think earlier my response would have been a very academic one. This probably fits Luke's depiction of me. But But now my response is actually, if you want your children to practice the faith when they're older, pursue a holy life. Say yes to Christ with your whole heart. You personally, not them. You go live a holy life and pursue that and demonstrate that to them. And that's what you're called to. And they will see that, and hopefully that will lead to a place of great joy. And they'll see that and love that and fall in love with it.
Yeah, if they catch dad kneeling on it, kneeling at 6 a.m, praying in a corner that he thinks nobody's watching, they'll imitate that, right? Like my wife has caught our 9-year-old kneeling in her corner in her room praying because she saw dad do that, and it's like, I didn't tell her to do that. I didn't force her to do that. I have barely even taught her how to pray, right? Like, but she wants to be like her parents. There's this natural goodness there. Imitation is the highest form of flattery, right? Yeah, be imitatable. There goes the light again.
Okay, so the last question I want to ask is more about just diaconate. We've talked about parenting, we've talked about marriage, we've talked about just conversion, but just about diaconate itself. So Deacon Ashley, maybe you can just start with, we didn't even say this, which we should have. What is a permanent deacon, and how does that differ from a transitional deacon? And then what has your life been like as a deacon?
I think I took the candidate question, so Luke needs to take this one.
Okay. Sounds good. You guys can duke it out however you want this to go.
Notice that when I say I took the candidate question, I actually took it and dismissed it.
Yes, you did.
So Luke can't do that here.
Oh.
I was trying to honor your desire to go first. So
yeah.
All right, Mr. Luke, Deacon Luke.
That's awesome. I'll get the light back on here. Probably, maybe not. So I think in one sense, there's no difference. It's the same ordination, right? Just because a priest gets ordained a priest after he's ordained a deacon, doesn't mean he ceases to become a deacon. So all priests are still diaconal. They still imitate Christ as the servant, which is what deacon means, to serve. They're still called to wash the feet of their servants, which is kind of that idyllic scene where we see Christ removing his garment and kneeling down and washing the feet of his disciples. And he says, what I've done to you, I want you to do to others. I've given you a model. And so the diaconate is one. It's not like there's a permanent and a transitional, and they're at their core different. The way they're lived out does look different. And so I think that's a good distinction of like, actually, it's the same participation in holy orders. It's the same ordination rite. There's no difference, except there's maybe one little phrase that's different about celibacy and stuff like that. So, but there is a difference in how they're lived out, in that transitional deacons are pursuing the priesthood, pursuing that fuller participation in holy orders, which is Christ as king and as priest, exercising that full authority. And then permanent deacons can be single or married. There are permanent deacons who are not married. So that's another misnomer, right? That only permanent deacons are married. No, actually, there's some celibate permanent deacons who are very courageous, and they're pursuing that vocation with that vow of celibacy. And so the diaconate is a call to serve those who Christ laid down his life for, which is everyone, right? We hope for the salvation of all people. And so I really see the diaconate as the part of the church which is ordained to specifically serve the community of the faithful, and also lead them in a way which they become missionaries to their neighborhoods and the people around them, right? Because deacons are unique in that we have a foot in the world, right? We all have secular jobs, or we all have families, or we're out in the communities in a way that the celibate priests are not. And but we're also a cleric, and we're in the church, and we're serving obedience to the bishop and to the mission of the church. And so there's this beautiful call of deacons, permanent deacons in particular, to be that bridge between the world and the church, and to kind of lead the people of God, both in worship, serving of the Mass, as well as in service to their neighbors, particularly through the works of corporal works of mercy, but also the spiritual works of mercy too. I think in this age of post Christianity, where our world is more and more secular, maybe the work of mercy that is most needed right now is that spiritual work of mercy, to share the gospel. You can do that sometimes more effectively through the corporal works of mercy, and so inviting people to encounter those who are poor in the prisons, in the nursing homes, in hospitals. It's a beautiful way to share the gospel as well. When people are poor, it's much easier to share the gospel. But then teaching others how to encounter that baptismal call to serve themselves. It's a joy. So I'm not sure, Deacon Ashley played cleanup hitter here. What would you add?
Beautiful. I'm gonna cry. So the
he's being facetious.
Oh, I thought that was
because I know Luke, I can only because it's Luke well enough. Otherwise, I could never get away with actually like trying to talk on a video like that. But I think you hit the nail on the head. So you know, I love the point about transitional deacons and permanent deacons being, you know, having the same character. That's fine. That's beautiful, and it's important for people to know actually. Like your pastor's still a deacon. He still has the heart of a servant, and to view him that way. Sometimes we forget about that. That you know, this man has the heart of a servant. He wants to serve God in a deep and meaningful way, and wants to serve and love you. And so we just lose sight of that sometimes. I think for me, I mean, Luke, you spoke to it very well. We're called to be icons of Christ the servant, and just hearing you talk, the thought struck me that you know, it's to go out and to help people encounter Christ, especially on the fringes, on the edges, and to go out where the church can't always be, and then to help people encounter Christ there. How? By being an icon of Christ the servant, which is just to love them, right? Just to wash their feet, just to do that thing that they need, to love them in a way that they've never been loved before, so that it gives them pause, and they feel for a moment maybe inspired to draw closer to the Lord through that. And so I think it's all beautiful and wonderful, and Luke lives it day after day.
I think you brought up a good point, right? Like, I come to work and I'm in my clerics because I'm working at the church, and I don't change out of the clerics when I'm going to the grocery store or when I'm going to the, get my oil changed. And I just become this sign of contradiction to the world. But there's also some curiosity there. Hey, wait, why is Luke in clerics? I know something about the church. I'll go talk to him. It's led to so many conversations that have been positive and very few that were negative. Like probably only one negative encounter versus like probably getting close to, hundreds of just wonderful encounters with people.
This is that's a powerful point actually, because it's something that I've discovered, like before the diaconate, and Luke's never been like that. I don't think he doesn't have this in him. The man is a pure missionary evangelist, but I was always like kind of put off and like maybe a little afraid of approaching people or sharing my faith with them, or like saying God bless you or this kind of stuff, right? I was like, I don't know how they're going to respond. Like they're going to think I'm weird, this kind of thing. But after the call to the diaconate, of course, that's like changed for me. That's grown. Like it's really, the Lord has just unblocked all of that. And there's a truth there that we fail to see, or we can fail to see, which is it's just what Luke said. There's nothing, like 99% of the time, the response is always positive.
Mm-hmm.
Like people are actually hungry for it and want to hear it and want to explore it and want to enter into that conversation. Like we're moving around the world thinking that they're going to think we're weird, or they're going to judge us, or they're going to do other things. But actually, they love to talk about it. They love to hear your story. They love to hear you talk about the Lord. If we would just do that more, but we're so hesitant. And so I think even like, for all of us, like we should be having more of those conversations, sharing more of that part of our life. Do not be afraid. Actually put yourself out there. You'll be surprised. 99.9% of the time, it's a very positive conversation, and you enter more deeply into someone's life, and you experience something you never expected.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And maybe one last thing about the diaconate that's similar is that like the sacramental opportunities we get to participate in, we can do baptisms, we can do weddings, we can do funerals and burials. And I find a lot of those things that I get the opportunity to celebrate are often the mixed marriages where it doesn't make sense to have a full mass, and over half the people there feel uncomfortable in the church. And so I can almost take that same worldview and step into that and say, actually, over half of these people haven't been in a church ever, or maybe not for a really long time. And so it's an opportunity for me to make them feel comfortable, make them feel welcome, and teach them a little bit. Like I love to step in if I know half of them are coming from a Protestant church that's very covenantal. Man, I'm going to talk all about how sacraments, actually that's a Latin term that just means covenant. And it's so much fun to enter into dialogue with these hardcore Protestants who thought the Catholics were weird, and they walk out saying, oh, I've never felt so welcome. And I really appreciated that little bit of teaching you threw in there at the rehearsal dinner or whatever, or the baptisms are graced moments where parents are open to an invitation to become more active in the church, or a funeral is an opportunity to heal a decades old wound with the church that wow, I didn't know I was going to get to participate in this healing and service in this way. But those sacramental moments are really graced moments that I get to hopefully magnify the work of the Lord. So it's been cool. And in only a year, so much journeying with people who are dying or preparing for new life. And I had 2 baptisms, a wedding, and a burial in the same day. And it was just like, I just got to journey with 3 different families through life and death. Like it was just profound, how you get to accompany people as a deacon and serve them in each different stage. So
that's beautiful. All right, deacons, do you have anything else you want to contribute, share about? Maybe there's a man out there that's thinking about becoming a deacon. Maybe there's a person out there that's thinking about becoming Catholic, or is just starting off in their faith, or is just getting married. Anything else you want to share? And Deacon Ashley, can I start with you this time? Or do you want me to go with Deacon Luke?
Did Luke start last? Was it? Okay, I guess he did.
Okay.
Here's what I would say. So thinking about becoming a deacon, 2 things for me, or even thinking about becoming Catholic, go spend time in the Blessed Sacrament. So spend time in adoration. Even if you're not Catholic, go sit in Mass, and just be there with the Lord. Be present with him in the Blessed Sacrament. All of my, for some reason or another, I have a good idea why, but I guess I just want to share that experience, that the most significant spiritual moments in my life have occurred in front of the Blessed Sacrament. So go there, talk to the Lord, give him your whole heart. Just be willing to like open up and to hold nothing back and see what comes. Almost always you will be amazed, and there will be a sense of wonder and joy that comes from that. So that, and then the second part of that, if you're Catholic and you are thinking about becoming a deacon, then maybe one little practical thing, which I think is, if you're just discerning it and you're praying with our Lord in front of the Blessed Sacrament, but you're still discerning it, go be a sacristan. So go spend time serving the Lord at the liturgy, at the Mass. Spend time serving his priests, and that's one of my favorite parts of the permanent diaconate is the opportunity to serve our priests, the opportunity to love them, to be there for them, to support them, to know that they have someone who's totally on their side and like all in for them. And it's it's something that we forget sometimes or we miss. But I love this idea of being able to be there for our priests and to just help them with whatever they need, to be their servant. And so go be a sacristan. And I think there, early in my journey, I was able to be a sacristan, and especially if you can, daily mass, as early as you can. If you can get a 6:30 mass, daily mass, be a sacristan. And those early morning hours of just you and the Lord and preparing the vessels, nothing more beautiful than that. Nothing that can just kind of draw you or open your heart to the whole journey.
Mm-hmm. Very beautiful.
Yeah,
Deacon?
that's great.
Yep.
Can you see how hot and all the way in Ashley is? He's like, go find an early mass. That's hilarious.
He's an all-in type of guy, sounds like. Woo!
Yeah.
That's
you
great.
Can't hack the 6:30 a.m. mass. You can't be a deacon. I love it. It's so good. So good. I think for me, some advice would be our temptation often when you enter into a period of discernment is like, God, just tell me what you want me to do. And you're just like this angsty, like all your prayer time is bent around this one thing of just like, I need you, God, just to tell me. And it's like, it's almost robbing of your peace and your time with the Lord, right? Like, if you're out on a date with your wife and all you want to do is talk about the decision to make, to buy a new car, it'd be like, gosh, this isn't a date. This is not intimate. This is not relational. Stop it, Luke. Stop talking about the 2016 Ford Transit T350, whatever, EcoBoost turbo engine. Let's just be and talk about your heart. How are you doing? So that would be my encouragement for discernment of like, be a child, just sit at the foot of your loving Father and just be with him in prayer. And then in the right moments, a reading at Mass, an antiphon, a word from a good friend, a trusted advisor, that's going to unlock your discernment and confirm what you're thinking. Not like going into prayer and almost like holding God hostage until he tells you what to do. So back to that great perennial advice that Ashley gave, like just be holy, just be with God. There's a great acronym, relationship, identity, mission, RIM. When we try and live mission, which is the third one first, God, what do you want me to do? God, what do you want me to do? I kind of cease being in relationship with him and understanding who I am and what I'm called to be in that relationship. And I'm only focused on what I can do, which we're classically doing as Americans, right? Like, just let me work out my salvation, or let me serve this person and be holy. It's like, no, you're holy when you're united with the Lord, and his grace flows through you and leads to these good works. So whenever I get questions of discernment, I always go back to prayer and say, am I just free to be with Jesus in my prayer time? Or am I so focused on this thing that it's like, getting in the way of that conversation that should be there? So relationship, identity, mission helps kind of keep everything in right order with God. And then it helps me be in right order with my spouse. And ultimately, like we talked about the whole time, whenever you're thinking about becoming a deacon, my first stop is always to have that conversation with my wife and be totally transparent. And if the Lord confirms it through her, then there's a great sign there. And as you heard, I did that with FOCUS, and she confirmed it there. And Deacon Ashley did it with the Diaconate. It wasn't the right timing. So a no might be a slow yes, right? A no's not a no. But just to be patient with that call, because there's never a perfect time to say yes. But there is, God's timing to say yes and enter into that. So.
Anything else, Deacon Ashley, you want to add to that? Nope.
No.
Awesome.
I love it.
Yes. Thank you, deacons, for being on my second podcast.
Whoa. Two deacons on our second podcast.
Hey, I'm doing well. So I really appreciate it. And to my audience, thanks for watching. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment and I will do my best to respond. Have a great day wherever you are in the world, and God bless you. Bye-bye.